This was several years ago now, and I was reminded of it recently. It was bizarre enough, too, that I had to ask my wife, who had been with me, if I imagined it. So it was late at night, but still about 100 degrees out, just north of the border to Mexico. We were on a side of the road that had one sidewalk up against a wall on the right, and to the left was an open field with large rocks. I was driving, and we had driven this road almost daily, so we were familiar with it. The radio had been working poorly, so I turned it off. We were kind of tired, so maybe our perceptions were off. Maybe we only noticed this whole thing because we didn't have the radio on. But there was a man laying in the gutter in a light blue button-down shirt, blue jeans, brown shoes, face down, still, just below the sidewalk. This occurred within a few seconds that felt like they took longer. My wife wanted to make sure that he was still breathing. I slowed down the car and pulled over, but on instinct told my wife to stay in the car. All my internal alarms were going off. I could hear my own heartbeat, and I just felt watched for some reason. She knows to trust me when I have moments like this, so she looked more critically at the situation. The following description is a combination of what we both noticed. So there were boulders from the field that had been dragged close to the road. There were streaks of fresh soil. It was very obvious, too, that they had just recently been moved. And on the far side of the recently moved boulders, I could see a bluish light, as though someone facing the road was reading something on their phone just out of sight. The light turned off, though, as soon as I looked that way. The man laying in the gutter was definitely breathing. There was no blood near him, and his back and sleeves were clean. If he had been hit by a car or fell, he'd be dirty, right? So we had to go, and I just knew it. I punched the gas pedal, and we got the heck out of there. In the rearview mirror, though, I saw 5 men running out from behind the boulders who had been running at the car and stopped when we sped away, but they were watching us leave. And one of them helped up the guy who was laying down. When we got to our destination, I called the police and reported it, but they basically told me to sit on it and spin. A few days later, the news reported that there was an attack at night, location undisclosed, but in this particular town, where a person pulled over their car when they saw a man lying in the road and was attacked by the man and his cohorts. Thankfully, the victim managed to escape, but it was definitely a bait-and-switch tactic. So, I feel like I should give some background about my family situation first to avoid confusion here. I have a half-brother who is 3 years younger than me from my dad's second marriage, who I just refer to as my brother. I also have a full-blooded sister who was 2 years older. When my dad divorced his second wife, she got primary custody of my brother, so we only got to see him maybe every other weekend when he would come over. My sister and I spent most, if not all, weekends at our bio mum's house, which made it difficult to see my brother for any length of time except in passing. My dad went off with his soon-to-be third wife and left my sister and I with our grandparents, who raised me from age 9 to 18. My dad and brother would stay with at my grandparents' on the weekends, and my dad would have visitations due to him wanting to keep his affair with his third wife a secret from my brother, for reasons that are far too complicated to get into this story. But hopefully that'll make sense. So when my sister and I first moved in with my grandparents, they were getting ready to sell their house and move to a completely different town. Our house was a bit bigger, and we each got our own bedrooms. We were very excited to be someplace new. I was 9 years old and in the 4th grade. My sister was 11 and in the 6th grade. My brother was 6 years old. Now, I believed in ghosts prior to living in this house due to an experience I had at a friend's house where I saw a shadow person. So I was in no way a skeptic to the paranormal, but I didn't really connect the dots with the experiences that I had until I was much older. The first odd thing that's always stuck with me too was the very first weekend my brother was over. I was going to my mum's house that weekend, and so my brother got to choose which of our bedrooms that he would sleep in while he was with my grandparents. And he picked mine, of course, and I was very much a perfumey smell, good candle-loving type girl, and I didn't want a stinky boy in my bed, so I objected. He said that he picked my room because my walls were painted blue and that was his favorite color. He was very excited. My grandma didn't give in to my protest in the end, saying that I needed to learn to share. But when I came back from my mum's, my brother came to me and said that he didn't want to ever sleep in my room again because there was a ghost living in there. He was honestly terrified and no longer excited. At the time, I thought that he was just being a scaredy cat baby who still believes in the boogeyman being under his bed. I scoffed and made fun of him, as older siblings do. But that moment always just stuck out to me for some reason. Now looking back, I wonder what he did experience. They say young children are sensitive to ghosts, so perhaps that had something to do with it. The next odd thing, though, that happened was the first night that we lost power. We lived in a pretty wooded area, so in the fall the wind would blow hard and knock branches into the power lines. We had constant power outages that time of year. And that night, when I went to bed, I had a dream that I woke up in the middle of the night. Everything in my dream was exactly as it was in reality. Same bedspread, same posters on the wall, everything. Only I had a fearful feeling come over me. I sat up in my bed and looked to the corner of my room where my bookshelf was, and there, crouching in front of the bookshelf, was this grotesque goblin-like creature just staring at me. Something about it just freaked me out too and made me wake up, and when I woke up, somehow I was brave enough to look over on my bookshelf, and there was nothing there. That was the last night, though, that I slept in my room during a power outage. Every time the power went out, I would always sleep in my sister's room. The dream sat with me for some time, and it scared me a lot. But once again, I sort of brushed this experience off as time went past as just a bad dream. The next thing that happened was perhaps the most bizarre. My grandparents spoiled me with a TV in my room and cable, so I would watch TV before bed every night. When I was ready to go to bed, I would turn the TV off and put the remote on my bedside table. It wasn't uncommon for me to toss and turn in the night and knock off the remote. I would often find it on the floor and under the bed and even wake up to myself knocking it off. And one morning, my remote wasn't on my side table. I looked on the floor and it wasn't there. I looked under the bed and it wasn't there either. I went as far as pulling all the furniture away from the walls to see if it flung across the room or something. I looked and looked and the remote was just nowhere to be found. I was completely at a loss. I had no idea where it could have possibly went, and weeks went by. I just couldn't find it. It just disappeared into oblivion. But then my grandmother was doing laundry and decided it was time to change the sheets on my bed. She couldn't lift up the mattress by herself to get the fitted sheet on, so I would help. I also couldn't lift it by myself, so we had to work together. We lifted up one side. There my remote was, dead center between my mattress and the box spring. I was shocked and dumbfounded, to say the least, as to how it got there. I never did rationalize it too, and it's just remained a mystery all this time. A very similar thing happened with my glasses sometime later. I would also put them on the bedside table before bed, and one morning they just weren't there. I searched and searched before I finally spotted them. They were on the top of my bookshelf, though, and the top shelf was way too high for me to reach. In fact, I had to climb up the first 2 shelves in order to retrieve them, and for the life of me, I still don't understand how they got there. Whenever my brother came over after his first time staying in my room, he would sleep in the living room with my dad. My dad didn't live with us, but would spend the weekends with my brother at my grandparents' house, as I stated above. My brother was terrified to go to the bathroom, which was directly across the hall from my bedroom, in the middle of the night by himself. He would wake my dad to escort him, and my brother finally confessed after all these years as to why as well. He told me that one time he went to the bathroom in the middle of the night and he left the door cracked. While he was doing his business, a man's disembodied head appeared in the doorway, staring at him, and whispered something incoherent at him. And that is why he never went to the bathroom alone again. Our bathtub had a sliding glass door, as opposed to a curtain. I took a shower before bed one night, and when I stepped out, the glass door came off the track and slammed down on my foot, and it severed my little toe like a guillotine. Now, the door was never loose before that night, and never did that before, but I spent the rest of my evening in the ER that night, and I don't know if this event was paranormal in nature, but when I look back at all the other things that happened, I often do wonder. But my sister, oddly enough, never experienced a single thing, but as my grandparents confessed when I was 18 and away at college, they too had some experiences. So when I was home visiting from college, my grandmother confessed that my grandfather and her were told when they bought the house that it was haunted. At the time, they didn't believe it, but weird things began to happen to them almost immediately. For instance, my grandma was cooking one afternoon while my sister and I were still at school, and my grandpa was taking a nap in their bedroom. My grandma put a spoon down on the counter after stirring what was the pot of food, and turned around to wash something in the sink or something like that, and when she turned back around, the spoon had disappeared. She couldn't explain it until she found it later in the living room on the couch on the other side of the house, and nobody else was in the home. Several times my grandma said that she was locked out of the house. She would step onto the back porch and shut the sliding door behind her, and when she tried to get in again, it would be locked. The sliding doors don't lock by themselves as well. She would have to find whatever room my grandfather was in and knock on the window to get back into the house. Apparently this happened often to many of the doors we had that led outside, not just the sliding door. At night, my grandparents would be getting ready for bed, and when they turned off the lights one night, suddenly all the lights in the house turned on by themselves, and so did the TV in their room. The volume turned all the way up. They knew too that it was whatever was haunting this house, so my grandfather yelled, "Knock it off," and everything turned off by itself in an instant. The realtor who sold the house to my grandparents disclosed everything to them. She explained the haunting as not being evil, but as mischievous. The most haunted rooms were the master bedroom, where my grandparents were, my bedroom specifically, and the bathroom. When my grandparents told me their experiences and all the weird things I experienced and my brother experienced, suddenly all made sense. This mischievous spirit hid my things because it was funny to watch me struggle to find them, and the dream I also had made sense. I mean, a goblin-like creature is a mischievous sort of creature, right? I don't like to speculate, and I don't really often talk about this, but I do feel like it was a spirit communicating to me through my dream, making its presence known. Perhaps the shower incident was it trying to pull a prank, or maybe not. I don't know. I did look into the history of the house, though, to see if there were any deaths, and there were none. The house was built in the 80s and had only one owner before us. We moved in 2003, so it was only 20 years old. But the house was at one point struck by lightning or something, and the garage was burnt down and had to be rebuilt, but there were no deaths. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to my experiences, and I hope it all makes sense. I'm definitely not the best at articulating my thoughts. I've never really told this story, at least not completely, but it's something that I still think about from time to time. It kind of haunts me. So, I used to work as a manager of a fast food place in a rather seedy part of a medium-sized city. I'd worked at the nicer location until they decided to transfer me, and there were rumors that the location I ended up getting sent to was going to be shut down anyway, which did end up happening a few years after I finally left. But anyway, the point is that the place wasn't being well taken care of. The dining room was dated and old, the owners were certainly not updating or maintaining the place well. They were just barely maintaining the very basic safety requirements, and sometimes weren't even doing that. For example, I often worked the closing shift, which for this location at the time was 4 p.m. to midnight. Between 7 p.m. and 11 p.m., it was me running the drive-thru and front counter by myself, and one employee running the kitchen. At 11 p.m., that other employee would go home, and I was left by myself to tidy up and do the deposit between 11 p.m. and 12 p.m. This isn't really safe, and I'm not sure it was even entirely legal at the time. This was over a decade ago, though, so who knows. Now, just to provide a little bit of context and background here, I'm a girl, but I'm not what you would consider small. I'm 6 foot, and during this time, I think people would probably say I came across as more than a little stern. I was younger, but I already spent years working in fast food, getting treated terribly by customers, and having drinks and food thrown at me. The location that I worked at was a swarm with junkies and drug dealers and just general scary behavior. And all this is to say that I didn't get ruffled that easily, and I took a lot of things in my stride. However, on this night, I was working the night shift with a new guy. The new guy had probably been working there for no more than a few weeks. I'd worked with him a few times before, but never the closing shift. And from the first time that I'd met him, I'd always gotten a strange vibe from him. And again, I'm not someone who, at the time, got ruffled easily. Prior to this, I'd worked with a night janitor at the other location, who'd had an Adderall addiction and rather unpredictable and scary rage problems, and some creepy incel kid who barely spoke more than 2 words at the time, and when he did, it was always something about how much he disliked women, and me in particular. Not an exaggeration either, that's actually what it was like. But this guy, this new dude, he was a whole different level of weird. He had a kid and professed to be a single father. He brought the kid around during the day, and the kid and his clothing were always really dirty. Like, really dirty. And not only that, but the kid also occasionally had bruises on his head and arms as well. The kid was a toddler, and I know that toddlers can get into things, but one look at that kid and I knew that those bruises were not from just a little kid messing around. I never saw the new guy behave aggressively towards his kid at all, but I don't know, it was just a bit of a feeling. And that feeling translated into other things. I don't know, he was just creepy. Maybe that's the best way to say it. It wasn't one thing in particular, it was just a feeling I got when I was around him. He was a medium-height, stocky young guy. He was totally average in every way, but he just had a vibe about him. He was always friendly and never rude or aggressive, but his eyes were just lifeless, for lack of a better description. Anyhow, on this night, I think he might have been called to cover a shift for somebody else or something. I was in charge of making the schedules most of the time, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have scheduled him to work a closing with me since I found him so off-putting. But the first part of the night was actually fairly normal. I ran the drive-thru and the front counter, and he ran the kitchen between 8 and 11, and he was talking to me, on and off between orders, telling me about his ex and how he'd come to be a single father. Apparently the mother of his child had a drug problem. In hindsight, I think a lot of what he said was meant to inspire sympathy. He really laid the troubled tale of him and his son on thick, but at the time I just felt a little bad for both of them, really. Especially his kid, who I suspected was being abused as well. And despite being as stern as I was definitely still young and naive when it came to manipulative people. He told me that he'd moved to the city and immediately had trouble finding work prior to getting the job at the place that we worked at. He said that he'd been running out of money and was behind on rent, bills, and didn't have any formula for his son. At the time, I think I just empathized with him and said that really sucked. We were both working in fast food, and I thought it was obvious that neither of us had any money. The place was bare bones minimum wage anyway, and I was barely getting by with 3 roommates and only pretty much eating the free meal I was given from restaurants every day. But anyway, he laid it on thick all night, but I don't know that I was really paying all that much attention to it. People tended to ramble when working the late shift, and I'd gotten used to listening to people spontaneously talk about their personal problems. In fact, I had a bit of a habit of listening and not really reciprocating the sharing, and I guess this didn't really go over very well with this new guy, because at some point, the new guy said something to the effect of, "You don't talk much, do you? I'm telling you my whole life story here, and you've got nothing to say?" I don't know if it was just that I was coming across as unsympathetic, or more likely that he was frustrated that I wasn't successfully manipulated into giving up personal details about myself. As far as I was concerned, he was just someone that I was working with, and I didn't know him. In fact, I didn't really want him to know me, and certainly I wasn't about to start telling him anything that wasn't surface-level chit-chat. But the guy was really intimidating. Something about his tone was off, and it definitely wasn't a jokey accusation or off-the-cuff comment. I can't remember exactly what I said too, but I remember that I just tried to play it off somehow. He didn't say anything more about it, but after that, the silence between us seemed a little tense. At 11 p.m, it was time for him to go home. The normal procedure was that kitchen closer would tidy the area, and an actual kitchen cleaner would come in a few hours later to deep clean things. In our case, it was a husband and wife team who did several locations, but they didn't usually come in until a few hours after I left. So, this guy was only tasked with a basic tidy, and then I would let him out, after which I would stay behind to prepare the deposit. But instead of this happening smoothly, this guy goes off into the staff bathroom and stays there for a long while, like almost 20 minutes or something. I didn't know what was going on, nor did I know exactly how to handle the situation. It had honestly never happened before. People usually could not get out of there fast enough at the end of the night, so it was weird. Was he sick? Did he fall asleep or something? I didn't know, but honestly, I just wanted to get my work done and go home. He finally emerged and quickly walked to the door and left. I was relieved, and it was weird, but I just kind of shrugged it off and hurried back to the office to get done what I needed to do, and not even 10 minutes later, I start to hear a banging at the back door of the restaurant. Loud, repeated banging. But normally I would ignore this. The back door faced an alley and was right next to a street full of bars and pubs. People leaving the bars and the pubs often got the idea for some reason that banging on the door would get them after-hours food service because, well, they were drunk. So this wasn't necessarily uncommon. So I just ignored it and kept hurrying to get things done. But the banging did not stop, and it somehow just seemed to get louder and louder and more urgent too. So I finally got up and I went to look at the peephole to see who was there. At this point, I was definitely on edge, and this edginess swelled into full-out anxiety attack when I see that it's the new guy standing at the back door. Now, my first thought was not to open the door. I really didn't want to open the door, in fact. But I knew that he knew that I was in there. What if he forgot something inside? What if it was his house keys or car keys or something? I was going to have to leave the building by that same door at some point as well, so there really seemed to be no escaping it. So, reluctantly and very stupidly, yes, trust me, I know, I opened the door. What I opened the door to was, quite frankly, terrifying to me. He said that he left his jacket, or keys maybe, I can't remember, inside, and I told him to tell me where and I'd go and get them. I didn't want him to come inside. If this had been any other person I worked with regularly, this would have been no big deal. I'd let them back in, let them get whatever they left behind, and they'd take off. But I instinctively knew that I didn't want this dude back inside, in the dark, empty restaurant, with me. But the new dude was not having it. He just pushed past me and said that he'd get it himself. Then he proceeded to shut himself in the bathroom again, and at this point, I just panicked. Instead of just staying there by the door, which in hindsight I should have, I rushed back into the office. The stupid girl, that's me, had left some of the cash that I was counting for the deposit out. The question for you as well is, what dummy would answer the back door at night at all, and especially with a till out? Well, this girl, I guess. Anyway, I managed to stuff the cash into the safe and lock it before he came to find me. The office was dark. It was summer and the air conditioning was on full blast, but this dude was sweating like a lot. I was taller than him, and I'm not a small girl, like I said, but somehow I just knew that this guy was about to hurt me. He was keyed up. As I watched his eyes dart around the office, I grabbed my jacket hanging on the hook next to me. I hadn't finished my deposit, but I was getting out of there. I didn't care how much trouble I got into in the morning for my work not being done. I smiled and told him that I was just leaving and that he could walk me out. I was really trying to not show my panic. Whatever he had planned, I wanted to give him an out for him to rethink it. So I smiled, grabbed my purse, and started to move towards the door. The new guy who was standing in the doorway didn't budge though. He started talking though about his son, about the money trouble that he'd been having, and capped the whole story off with a request for a loan. From the tone of his voice, it was clear that this was not a loan. He was demanding money from me, and he said that he would pay me back as soon as he got paid, and that I'd really be helping him out. I didn't know what to do, to be honest. I mean, he had me trapped, and I wasn't leaving the office or the building unless he allowed it. Or at this point, at least, I wasn't leaving without a fight. Something told me, too, that despite my height difference, I wasn't about to win. So, in the end, I just gave him some money from my wallet. $50, I think. When I gave it to him, he said, "Thanks, you're really helping me and my son out. I won't forget it." But when he said it, he just had no expression. No smile, no speech, nothing at all. He didn't seem grateful or even relieved. Just dead eyes, arms limp at his sides, and it was terrifying. To this day, I really don't remember how I got him to the door. All I remember was shutting the door behind him, making sure the door was securely locked, and rushing into the office to burst into tears. I didn't finish my work, but I stayed in there until I could force myself to leave out of the same door. I was sure that he was going to jump me when I left. The thought never occurred to me for some reason to just call the cops. I don't know why. I guess I just felt like nothing serious had happened yet. I mean, he'd asked me for money and I'd willingly given it to him, despite the fact that I felt I had no choice and had been scared half to death. But I only saw him one time after that, and neither of us never mentioned that night or the money. I don't know why I didn't ask for it back. I think I was embarrassed or scared or perhaps both. I don't know. I don't think I've ever told anyone in my life this story, or at least if I have, I definitely left out the part where I gave him money and never got it back. But pretty quickly after that, he stopped showing up to his shifts and I never saw him again. Now, I don't believe in throwing words like psychopath around. I think people overuse the psychology terms like that way too much, making them just synonyms with anyone who is just horribly behaved. And there are a lot of varying degrees of terribly behaved people in this world, unfortunately. But after taking a lot of abnormal psych classes, I can say that there was definitely something about this guy's effect that was just wrong, for a lack of a better term. I'd smile and he'd smile. I'd frown and he'd frown. It was almost like talking to someone pantomiming emotions. Maybe I'm just remembering it that way because it was such a terrifying experience for me, but the truth is that I've never been comfortable talking about this event. And to this day, when I think about it, I feel just as uncomfortable as I did the day that it happened, more than a decade ago now. In the end, though, the head manager at my restaurant did make an anonymous call to child services about the guy's kid, unrelated to my incident, obviously. I don't know what, if anything at all, came out of that. But, boy, is that one night that I'll never forget. So this happened in Brazil when I was about 10 or 11, around 2004 maybe. I remember it was exactly 9 PM and I was playing The Sims on the family computer with my cousin. I got to the cabinet, got a glass cup and went to the water filter. The filter was right next to the big window with undulating glass panels. Common in Brazil, something for privacy I think. The undulated glass made everything that was far look fractured, and the closer an object was, the less distorted it got. I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings, but I was always a little scared of going into the kitchen at night because every time I turned the lights on, pigeons that were just chilling outside, there was a narrow corridor to the backyard outside the kitchen window with a high wall separating the houses. They started flapping their wings frantically, making a lot of noise and honestly scaring me half to death. Anyway, this time I didn't really check if there were pigeons because I didn't hear any noise. The windows were closed and there was only one light source lighting the outside. I finally fill my cup and I start drinking, and as soon as I'm finished and start putting the glass down, I look up and there's a dark shape outside. And because I was holding a glass cup, I was carefully putting it down before considering running away, but I took that time to take a very good look at it. It was so close to the window that there wasn't much distortion at all. The shape of a dark brown, but not brown like human skin, head, and a neck with huge pitch black, almost perfect circles as eyes. There was no indication of a nose or ears, but there was a small shadow where the mouth should be, as if it was a very small mouth with no lips. But the strange thing is that I didn't move the slightest the whole time that it was there. The black eyes felt like they were staring right at me. I was petrified. Afterwards, I absolutely bolted out of the kitchen, screaming and telling my cousin to go check on that window. She obviously didn't want to, so I myself, after about 2 minutes, went back to check, and there was nothing there. There was no sound. There was no creature or thing, whatever it was. Me and my granddad went to check the backyard the next day, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. I was never a kid that really believed in anything paranormal, but it was so strange that I still don't really know what to make of it.